It wasn't meant to be permanent. Just a season, maybe two. Long enough to get out of the city and clear my head. The place I found wasn't even on the first few pages of listings. Moorfield Ridge sat at the top of a sparsely maintained mountain road, past a stretch of old-growth forest and beyond the last working gas station for 20 miles. When I drove up that winding path and past the rusted green sign that said "Welcome to Moorfield," it felt like I'd slid into a pocket of the world the time had forgotten. The rental was a converted farmhouse at the edge of town. It still had the original stone walls, old storm windows that rattled even in still air, and a sloped tin roof that groaned at night. The man who handed me the keys barely made eye contact, just mumbled something about the cellar door sticking and the heater needing patience. He never asked why I'd come, and I didn't offer. The first time I noticed the well, it was just a dark shape in the side yard. I remember because the grass around it was yellowed, even though it had rained that week. It was old, made of smooth gray stones, weather-worn and slightly leaning, with a wooden lid balanced loosely on top. There was no bucket or crank that I could see, just a length of rope tied around a hook on the side, trailing down into the dark. I didn't think much of it at the time. A remnant from before the plumbing was modernized, probably. That, or it was ornamental. Creepy, sure, but not uncommon in places like this. It was my third night when I met the neighbor. She was out front, trimming the edges of her flower bed with a pair of clippers that looked older than she was. I gave a polite wave as I walked past, and she nodded, but didn't smile, just stared a little too long before finally speaking. "You're the one renting the O'Connell place," she said. I told her yes, that I was up from the city for a break. "You've seen the well, then?" I hesitated. "Yeah, in the yard. It doesn't work anymore, right?" She snipped a flower stem with a sharp snap. "Not for water," she said, "but people still use it." I didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she stepped a little closer, lowered her voice. "Don't toss anything down there. Not unless you mean it. And if you do, make sure you come back in 13 days. "What happens in 13 days? She paused. That's when he remembers. The next few seconds hung thick between us. He? She wiped her shears on her apron. The man in the well, the one who didn't die, right? And then, as if that explained everything, she turned and walked back toward her porch, the clippers still in her hand. I spent the rest of the evening pretending the conversation hadn't happened, though it clung to the back of my mind like a wet leaf. I didn't even really believe she was serious. Probably just some small-town folklore meant to spook outsiders. Every place has its local legends. But later that night, as I stood brushing my teeth in the upstairs bathroom, I noticed the window overlooked the yard, and there it was, the well, sitting silently in the moonlight. The shadows made it look deeper than it should have been. A ring of dead grass circled it like a burn mark. I shut the curtain and went to bed. The next morning I wandered into town. Moorfield Ridge was small enough to walk across in 10 minutes. There was a diner, a post office, a general store, and not much else. Most of the homes looked like they'd been inherited rather than bought. People noticed me, but didn't say much. I got a few nods, but most of the expressions were neutral, guarded, like I'd walked into a room just after someone told a secret. At the general store, while buying coffee and bread, I asked the clerk, an older guy with a sunburned neck, if the town had any trails worth hiking. "Plenty of trails," he said, ringing me up. "You staying up on the O'Connell property?" "Yeah." He stopped typing and looked up. "You been near that well yet?" I forced a laugh. "Everyone here seems real interested in that thing. Then maybe listen to him." I blinked. "Okay, why?" He bagged the bread slowly. "Because it's not a story. Not really." I waited, but that was all he said. I thanked him and left, but my hands were colder than the air outside. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I walked out to the well just before sunset. The lid was crooked on the stones, and I could see a dark slit between two warped planks. There was a faint smell, too, like damp earth and rust, not fresh like spring water. more like something sealed up too long. I found a small rock and dropped it through the gap. I expected the familiar plunk of water, but what I heard was slower, duller, like something soft being disturbed, then ripples. Something moved. I stepped back instinctively. My heart picked up for no good reason. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe raccoons or something worse had fallen in, but even that didn't sit right. The sound had felt too slow, like it took a long time to reach the bottom. And there had been no echo, just that ripple. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house felt louder. A floorboard popped somewhere downstairs and I sat straight up, ears straining, but nothing followed. Eventually morning came, and with it, the relief of sunlight. I threw myself into errands the next day, anything to keep from thinking about it. I drove down to the nearest gas station, 30 minutes out of town, just for a bag of ice and a six-pack I didn't need. I stopped by the small public library and checked out a few books I had no real interest in reading. I even considered calling a friend back in the city, but the cell reception was garbage unless I stood halfway up the hill near the tree line. By the time I got home, I had convinced myself that it was nothing, that the people here just needed their local ghost story. It was a way to give the town texture. The well had history, probably a few accidents over the years, and the myth had filled in the cracks, and I told myself that as I stood outside, can in hand, walking back to the house. That the well didn't matter, that I wasn't going to lose sleep over it, and yet I walked back to it, just for a second, just to look. The lid was still off-center. The rope still hung limp over the edge. I fished into my jacket pocket and pulled out a coin, just a quarter. Stupid, I thought. Really stupid. I tossed it in. There wasn't a wish, not really. Maybe something vague about clarity, maybe something about feeling like myself again, but the coin was already gone before I could decide. This time, I didn't wait for the sound. I turned around and walked back to the porch, beer sweating in my hand. Behind me, the rope shifted. It was the sound of tension returning to something that had been slack for too long. A slow, reluctant pull, as if the weight on the other end had just remembered it had something to do. I didn't turn around. I went inside, locked the door, and poured a drink I didn't finish. The sound didn't stop. I sat on the couch, beer bottle untouched, fingers curled too tightly around the armrest, and listened. At first I thought I'd imagined it, just the wind catching the rope or some delayed creak settling in, but after the third slow, deliberate drag of fiber slipping against stone, I knew it wasn't random. It was pulling, not quickly, no jolt or sudden lift, just a long, sluggish tension being reeled in, as if someone or something was patiently drawing the rope upward hand over hand. The motion carried the weight of something that had been sleeping too long and hated being reminded it still existed. I told myself not to look. That was the mistake people made in horror movies, rushing back out to confirm. I wasn't going to do that. I was smarter. I stayed seated. I waited for the sound to stop on its own, but it didn't. It just kept going. Minutes passed. 15, maybe 20. Still that wet whisper of rope moving, then a faint tap, like wood lightly brushing stone. The lid, then silence. Even after it ended, I sat still, afraid to move. I counted to 30, then 100, just to be sure. Then I stood and locked the front door even though I knew nothing out there would need a key. The next morning, I went out before coffee. The sun was already warm, and the dew hadn't yet burned off the grass. I tried to act normal, like I wasn't walking straight to the well. The lid was back in place, centered perfectly this time. The rope was gone. No hook, no coil, no knot. Just smooth gray stone, the lid sitting flush as though no one had touched it in years. Except the grass was damp around it, and the stones had that same dark, slick sheen that happens when something wet has dried unevenly. I crouched down and noticed water pooled slightly under one of the stones near the base. It hadn't rained. I reached forward and touched the stone. It was cold, much colder than the air, and slick. I wiped my fingers on my jeans and stood back up. I didn't stay out there long. Inside, I pulled the curtain closed again and told myself it was condensation. Maybe groundwater was seeping up through the bottom. Old wells aren't exactly waterproof. It was stupid to be worried, just a coin in a creepy town tradition. That's all it was. Still, I couldn't bring myself to mention it to anyone. Not at the store, not during my short walk through town later that day. I'd already drawn attention to myself as the outsider. No need to add paranoid idiot to the list. I kept expecting the neighbor, the woman with the flower shears, to show up again. Maybe ask me if I'd followed her warning. But I didn't see her that day. Her house looked the same, garden trimmed, porch swept, but no sign of her. Maybe that was a warning too. That night I left the porch light on. I told myself it was just habit. But when I looked out through the window above the sink, I knew I was lying. The well was just barely visible in the dark. A faint shape at the edge of the yard where the porch light's glow began to lose strength. It didn't move. It didn't do anything, but I couldn't take my eyes off it. Eventually, I made myself go to bed. I shut the door to the bedroom, locked it, again, pointless, but it made me feel better, and laid down. That night, I dreamed I was underwater, not drowning, not struggling, just suspended, not moving. All around me was this silt-thick stillness, a green murk pressing close, filled with floating debris. Not things I could see exactly, just shapes, fabric, hair, bone, silt curling upward like it had been disturbed. I opened my mouth to scream, and water filled me, heavy and cold, and the last thing I heard before jerking awake was the metallic clink of a coin hitting stone. I sat up in the dark, throat burning. My skin was dry, but I felt soaked, as if the bed had just spit me out from somewhere deep and cold. I checked the sheets. They were dry. My heart was still hammering when I went downstairs. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day was worse. It was small at first, things that could be written off. I opened the fridge and found droplets of water on the top shelf, but the bottles weren't sweating. My boots, which I always left by the door, were damp inside, even though they'd been under cover. Then the faucet in the bathroom started running slower than usual, like something in the pipes was choking the flow. When I unscrewed the filter, a wad of thick, stringy black hair slid out with a sucking noise and plopped into the sink. Not coarse like mine, long pale strands tangled like it had been dragged through grime. I flushed it, even though it didn't want to go. The toilet backed up that night, not full, not overflowing, just enough to bubble at the base, a slow churn of water that never settled. The smell of wet rot began to creep in around the edges of the floorboards. It wasn't just coincidence anymore. On the 6th day, I walked into town again. I didn't plan to ask questions, but something about the way the morning fog lingered in the trees made me change course halfway through and head toward the diner instead of the store. There were only 2 people eating inside. An old man in a blue flannel coat, hunched over his coffee like it was keeping him alive, and a younger waitress wiping down the same spot on the counter over and over. I sat down 2 stools from him. After a moment I asked, "You lived here long?" He gave a grunt. "Born here. Leaving's the trick." I hesitated. "You ever hear of someone called the Sleeper?" He didn't look up, but the waitress stopped wiping. The silence went brittle. "You tossed in, didn't you?" he said. Not a question. I felt the skin on my arms tighten. "Just a coin," I said. "Didn't make a real wish or anything." "Doesn't matter," he said. "You acknowledged him. You fed him." I didn't know what to say. He finally turned, and his eyes were milky but sharp, like river stones under cloudy water. 13 days, he said, and not a minute late. I leaned in, trying not to sound like I was begging. "What happens if I don't?" He stared for a long moment. Then he wakes hungry, and he walks. I left the diner before I finished my coffee. That evening I stood outside again, watching the well. I didn't approach it this time. I just stood at the window, arms folded tight, trying to count how many days had passed. 6, almost 7. It hadn't even been a week, and already the air in the house felt heavier. Damp, like the walls were sweating. The drains were making that gurgling noise again. I turned away from the window and flipped the light off, just for a second. And in that second, I swear I saw movement at the well. Not fast, not even a full shape, just something leaning like a person slumped too far over the edge. When the light came back on, nothing was there. But when I opened the cabinet under the sink, the drain pipe was dripping. Something thick and dark, something that smelled like pond water. I wiped it up, but it came back again by morning. The next few days blurred together. I stopped sleeping through the night. Not because of the dreams, they'd stopped after the one, but because the house never felt still anymore. Even in silence, there was always the sense of something shifting beneath the floorboards or brushing faintly against the walls. The water sounds came most often in the early hours, dripping, sloshing, soft gurgles that made the plumbing feel alive. Not in the way pipes groan in old houses, but as if something was moving through them. I began to notice the smell before I even entered a room. Damp rot, like the way pond water clings to fabric, like mildew under sunless rocks. I cleaned everything, poured bleach into every drain, bought a dehumidifier from the next town over, but the wet stink always returned. The well remained still during the day. I checked it from the window at least a dozen times a day, and each time it sat exactly the same. The lid centered, no rope, no movement. But at night, I heard things, small sounds, insects going quiet, the faint scratch of something dragging along wood or stone too slow to be an animal. Once I caught myself leaning toward the front door with my ear against it. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I heard what sounded like wet breathing just inches beyond the door, and I jerked back like I'd been shocked. I didn't check again after that. On the 8th day, I woke up to water on the floor, a trail, thin, winding, like something had slithered through the hallway from the bathroom to the kitchen. It glistened in the morning light, clear and slow drying. The strange part wasn't the water, it was that it hadn't come from any source. No dripping pipe, no leak, just that winding path, like someone had been tracking wet feet across the wood. I followed it. It stopped at the kitchen sink. Inside the basin was a coin. Not the quarter I dropped, I knew that. This one was older, darker, with the edges warped and green with age. It hadn't been there the night before. I would have seen it. I stared at it for a long time, trying to make sense of how it got there. Eventually, I picked it up. It was slick, like it had just been pulled from deep water, and cold enough that I flinched. I dropped it onto the counter with a clatter, and the sound it made wasn't metal. It was dull, like bone against stone. I wrapped it in a paper towel and tossed it into the trash. That night, the trash can was empty. No wrapper, no coin, just damp paper sludge at the bottom and the faint outline of something round pressed into the liner. I took the whole bin outside and dumped it. By the time I turned around, the back door was open. I hadn't left it that way. I stood frozen in the threshold, staring into the kitchen where the overhead light cast its usual pale yellow glow. The air in the room felt warmer than outside, humid and thick, like a greenhouse just after watering. I didn't walk in right away. I just watched the edge of the floor where the linoleum ended and the wood began. The space right under the door. There were droplets forming there, slow and symmetrical, like something had been standing just inside before I got there. I shut and locked the door. I didn't eat that night. By the 9th day, I was leaving lights on in every room. It didn't help. Shadows pooled in corners no matter what, and the house seemed to grow smaller with every passing hour. The air had a heaviness to it, like I'd been breathing in something other than oxygen, something denser. My lungs felt full all the time. My chest ached in the mornings, like I'd been sleeping underwater. The town was no better. People avoided me now. Even the clerk at the general store only spoke to ask if I was paying cash or card. I thought about asking for help, about returning to that diner and tracking down the old man again. But what would I say? That something was moving through my house at night, leaving wet footprints and coins I never owned? That water was creeping up through every crack in the floor like it had a mind of its own. They'd either think I was crazy or worse, they'd know I wasn't, so I kept quiet. On the 10th day, I found something in the attic. The smell had been getting stronger upstairs, thickest near the crawl space door in the hallway. I assumed something had died up there. Mouse, possum, maybe something bigger. I steeled myself and climbed the fold-down ladder with a flashlight in one hand and a towel over my mouth. At first there was nothing, just insulation, exposed beams, dust, the usual attic junk. But then I saw it, tucked near the far corner, half buried in the old insulation. A pair of shoes, boots, caked in dried mud, and something else, something black and flaking. They were positioned as if someone had been standing there, then vanished. Right beside them, lying flat and half-soaked, was another coin. This one wasn't old, it was a modern quarter, but not the one I dropped. This one was too clean. It gleamed under my flashlight like it had just been minted. I didn't touch it. I backed down the ladder slowly, closed the hatch, and pushed a chair under it. Not that it would help. That night I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the couch with the lights on and a blanket wrapped around me, listening. The sounds had changed. No longer just water, but dragging, something soft and slow being pulled across hardwood floors, like a soaked burlap sack being inched closer. I held my breath until it stopped. Then I waited longer, just in case. At some point, just before dawn, I must have drifted off. When I opened my eyes, the blanket was gone. So was the chair from beneath the attic hatch. The ladder was down. I didn't go up to check. On the 11th day, I noticed the footprints. Not muddy, not wet this time. Just slight depressions in the wood grain, as if someone barefoot and heavy had stood too long in one place. They started at the window near the sink, passed through the living room, and stopped in the hall just outside my bedroom door. That was the day I stopped, pretending I'd imagined anything. I wrote down the day I dropped the coin, counted it 3 times to be sure. If what they said was true, I had 2 days left. 2 more days before... What? The story wasn't exactly clear on that part, only that the sleeper came up if you didn't come back. But come back where? The well? That didn't make sense. I hadn't given a real offering. I'd made no deal, no pact. It was just a stupid coin tossed out of boredom, unless that was enough. Unless that's all it ever took. That evening, the neighbor finally returned. I saw her from the upstairs window, out in her garden again, trimming away dead leaves with her rusted clippers. I rushed outside, cutting across the yard before I could lose my nerve. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. "I need to ask you something," I said. "About the well." She didn't answer. I dropped a coin 9 days ago, 10 now. I didn't mean anything by it. Still nothing. What happens if I don't go back? Her jaw tensed. Then, softly, then he comes to you. I felt my throat dry out. How do I stop it? "You don't," she said. "You obey, or you're taken." I wanted to shake her. But what does that mean? Obey how? I go back to the well? I take the coin back? What? She looked up at me then, and for the first time I saw fear, not for herself but for me. "Return," she said, "before the 13th night. Offer something more than you took. What do I offer?" But she had already turned and gone inside, door closing behind her like a gavel. I stood in her garden until the porch light flicked off. When I got home, the well was open. The lid, so stubborn and heavy, was tilted off, leaning on the grass. The darkness inside looked deeper than before. I didn't go near it. I just stood at the edge of the porch watching it breathe, because that's what it was doing now. Not literally, but it felt like it, like the air around it pulsed in and out, warm and wet like breath from a cave. Something was waiting, and it knew exactly how many days I had left. I didn't sleep the 12th night, not even a little. I sat in the armchair facing the door, every light in the house blazing, and watched shadows twitch under the furniture as the bulbs flickered one by one. By 3 in the morning, the air inside the house had turned thick and clammy. The dehumidifier gave up sometime before dawn, just let out a low mechanical whine and stopped cold. I left it where it was, collecting beads of condensation that now ran down the walls like tears. The floorboards moaned every few minutes, long sighing creaks that felt almost conversational. I could hear them upstairs, too, pacing slowly above my bedroom ceiling. I didn't go up there anymore, not after the attic ladder. The only clock I still trusted was the old analog one in the kitchen, battery-powered, yellowed from age. My phone had started glitching 2 days earlier, screen flickering like it was submerged behind glass. At one point, the battery jumped from 80% to dead in under a minute. After that, I stopped trying to call anyone. 12 days. I'd done everything short of running, but I knew if I tried to leave now, the road would be gone. Or worse, still there but not leading out. The town didn't want me to go, not until this was finished, so I decided to return, to obey. I wasn't sure what offer something more than you took meant. A coin? Something sentimental? I didn't have much. My wallet, my car keys, the watch my dad gave me before he passed. I didn't want to give it up. But I was running out of options, and even less time. I waited until daylight, as if that mattered. When I stepped into the yard, the air had that stillness that comes before a storm. Not a single bird called. No insects hummed. Even the leaves on the trees held still, as if the whole town was holding its breath. The well waited where it always had, but now the lid had been pushed aside entirely. The hole yawned wide in the ground like a wound. I could see the mouth of the shaft clearly in daylight, stone walls slick with moisture, darkness descending into deeper black. The rope was back, but not like before. It had changed. It wasn't twine or hemp now. It looked like it had been braided from hair, pale strands woven tightly, dark with water. It hung down into the well with unnatural weight, dragging slightly at the edges as if being pulled from below. I stood at the edge for a long time. I took the watch from my wrist. It was nothing fancy, just a scratched old Timex leather band cracking from years of use. I held it in my palm and stared down into the dark. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice sounded small against the open sky. I dropped the watch. It spun once, catching a glint of sun, and then vanished into the dark with a faint tink, not the splash I expected. No water, just stone, and then nothing. I stepped back. I thought that might be it, but the moment I turned to leave, the rope moved. It didn't jerk. It didn't pull. It simply tensed, like something below had reached the end of it and given a gentle tug. The hair cord went taut, then slack again, then taut, like a question, like a test. I ran back to the house and didn't look back. I stayed inside the rest of the day, pacing from window to window, curtains drawn. Every few hours I peeked through the blinds, and the rope was still there, coiled loosely beside the well, waiting like a fishing line. By evening, the house began to change. I noticed it first in the pictures on the wall, not that they moved, but that their frames were damp and the images inside had begun to blur. Faces ran like watercolor, smiles dissolving into pools of washed-out ink. The baseboards along the walls were swelling too, warped. I pressed my fingers against one and the paint bubbled beneath the pressure like something breathing under the surface. I backed away. The kitchen floor had started to bow upward in the center, as if the house was rejecting itself, and the drains. They had stopped making noise altogether. No bubbling, no gurgling, just silence, as if whatever had been crawling up from the pipes had finally finished climbing. It was around midnight when I heard the bucket. I hadn't noticed it before, but the well had a bucket again. I didn't see it, I heard it. That low grinding scrape of warped wood against stone as something turned the handle slowly, like a crank that hadn't been touched in decades. The rope strained, the pulley wheezed, Each tug echoed into the night like an old man dragging himself up a narrow stair. It was slow, deliberate, and then came the knock. Not on the front door, on the pipes, a rhythmic clang from beneath the kitchen sink, 3 times, followed by a long pause, then again. It reverberated through the walls like a heartbeat. I couldn't move at first. My legs were frozen. My hands shook. The knocking came again, this time from the floor vent under the couch, then from the bathtub drain upstairs, then the toilet, all at once. The house became a drum and something was playing it from the inside. I covered my ears and crouched in the hallway, muttering, I'm sorry, over and over, like that would matter, like that would change what I'd set in motion. Eventually the knocking stopped, but the water didn't. I smelled it before I saw it, brackish and sour, like runoff from a flooded cemetery. It seeped in under the doors, rose through the floorboards, spilled from the edges of the walls. It didn't rush, it rose, steady, measured, as if filling the house was a ritual. By morning, the house was damp to the knees. My clothes clung to my skin. The furniture was soaked. The TV sparked and went black sometime around dawn. I sat in the armchair again, too tired to do anything else, listening to the slosh of the sleeper making its way up the rope, because I knew, now, that was the 13th day, the final day, the day the well gives back what it doesn't want. At noon, I opened the front door. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could stop it. That if I returned now one last time, maybe it would take the offering and end it. The well was no longer alone. A trail of wet prints led from it to the house, barefoot, wide, impossibly wide. But I saw no one. The rope was fully coiled now, resting at the base of the stones in a neat spiral. The bucket leaned to one side, old and warped, but dry. Whatever had come up had already arrived. I stepped forward and something squelched under my shoe, a coin, the one I dropped 12 days ago. It was clean, fresh, like it had never left my hand, and beside it, my watch, still ticking, said exactly 13 minutes behind. I didn't pick up the coin, or the watch. I left them lying there in the wet grass, gleaming in the gray daylight like bait. The air around the well felt different now, stagnant but somehow thick, as if it were pressing back. I backed away slowly, not turning my back to it until I was at the porch steps. The door was still open. Inside, the house felt like a cave. The air hung motionless, wet as cloth, and everything I touched left damp fingerprints behind. The floor was soft now, warped and swollen like it had soaked for weeks. My boots squelched when I stepped, even though I hadn't been outside long. It smelled worse in here than it did outside. Mildew mixed with something older, something like rot that had gone sour in the bones. I closed the door and locked it, even knowing it wouldn't matter. Then I turned, and he was there, at the end of the hallway, near the bedroom door, still, upright, watching. I didn't see him arrive. I didn't hear a sound. He was just there, as if the hallway had always contained him, and I had only now noticed. The sleeper. He was tall, inhumanly tall, his shoulders nearly brushing the frame above the door. His body was soaked, not dripping but seeping, like the water lived inside his skin and was pressing outward. His clothes were old, buttoned shirt, dark slacks clinging like they'd been pulled from a grave, but there was no flesh I could see, only outlines, bulging at the seams in places, thin in others, as though his body had collapsed inward and then been inflated with something else. He didn't move, didn't breathe, but I could hear him. The sound wasn't from his mouth. It came from deep inside him, a watery churn, like something being stirred in a bucket. A slow, wet rhythm that filled the hallway and froze me where I stood. I tried to step back. My foot slipped. I hit the floor hard, shoulders slamming against the warped boards. When I looked up, he hadn't moved, still watching. His head was tilted forward ever so slightly, not inquisitive, but weighted, like it was heavy with rot. His hands hung limp at his sides, fingers long and bloated, joints misshapen. One of them twitched. Just once. I crawled backward on my hands, scrambling into the living room. I tried not to take my eyes off him, but every blink felt like a mistake. Each time I closed my eyes for a split second, I feared he'd be closer. But he didn't move. He just stood there, listening. I reached the far side of the room and pulled myself upright using the armrest. I considered bolting for the back door, but my legs felt wrong, numb, like I'd been in cold water too long. My fingers were stiff too, and every breath rattled like I was breathing steam. When I looked back, he was gone. The hallway was empty, still wet, still warped, but no one there. I didn't move for a full minute. I waited for the sound of steps or the creak of wood, for breathing, for anything, but there was nothing. I crept back to the hallway, heart hammering in my throat, and peeked into the bedroom. No one. The closet was open. The window was closed. No water trail. No footsteps. Just an empty room. And then I heard it. Not behind me. Not in the house. Below me. From beneath the floorboards. The sloshing sound, closer now. The sound of something moving through standing water just inches below the surface. No crawl space. No access. But it was there. It moved slowly, circling. The floor groaned under my feet, and then it stopped. Right beneath me. I ran, back out the door, into the yard. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the trees, panting, drenched in sweat and mist and something colder. I leaned against the trunk of a pine and stared at the house. It looked wrong. It sagged in places now, like the foundation had softened. The windows were fogged from the inside. The roof tiles were damp and sagging, and the wood around the front door was darkened with rot that hadn't been there yesterday. The well stood quiet behind it, but the rope was gone again. I stayed outside until dark, even as the fog rolled in, even as the cold crept up my sleeves and into my spine. I stayed until the woods behind me began to stir and I had no choice. Back inside. The lights flickered as I entered, and for a moment all of them went out. I stood in perfect darkness, soaked to the skin, heart a drum in my chest. And then the lights came back, one by one, and he was there again. Closer this time, standing just inside the kitchen. Same tilt of the head, same dripping posture. But now his hand was outstretched, palm up, waiting, in it. My watch, still ticking, still 13 minutes behind. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. But the air thickened between us. I felt the water again rising, though I couldn't see it this time. It pressed against my legs, up through the floorboards, through the walls, through my own skin. Like my house had become the well, and I was already waist deep in what was coming. The sleeper didn't approach. He didn't need to. He was already here, already rising. I don't remember going to sleep. I don't even remember sitting down. All I remember is the light. It had started to flicker again, and I'd backed away from the kitchen, away from the figure with my watch in its outstretched hand, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the house was dim, windows coated in fog from the inside. Light bled through them like bruises, heavy and discolored. The chair under me groaned as I stood. My clothes were still wet, the fabric stiff and cold like it had frozen in place. Every joint ached, my teeth chattered. The kitchen was empty. No sleeper, no watch, no sound either. None of the familiar creaking, no shifting water beneath the boards. But that wasn't comfort. That was absence, hollow quiet. I needed answers. I had waited too long, hoped too hard that this was just some backwoods ghost story with a ritual ending. Throw in the right trinket, say the right words, and you walk away with your soul intact. But the sleeper wasn't superstition. He wasn't metaphor. He was real, and he was rising. I drove to the library. I don't even remember turning the key. I just remember getting there. The building sat squat between two closed shops on a cracked corner of Main Street. No lights inside. I banged on the door anyway, until a figure moved through the shadows and unlatched the bolt. It was a woman, probably in her 60s, with wiry gray hair and dark eyes behind smudged glasses. She didn't ask why I was there, just opened the door and turned away, expecting me to follow. The inside smelled like damp paper. History, I said. Town records. Something about the well. She stopped walking. Shouldn't be poking around in that, she said without turning. I don't care, I replied. Please. She considered me for a long moment. Then she led me to the back where the shelves gave way to a tall metal filing cabinet. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a folder so worn the tab had gone soft and gray with age. It had no label. She handed it to me. I didn't thank her. I sat on the floor and opened it on my lap, flipping past receipts, yellowed newsprint, even a few hand-scrawled notes on torn ledger paper. Most of it was garbage, broken references, decades-old water assessments, ledgers for a defunct milling operation. Then I found it, an article clip from a 1901 local newsletter. Body of Elias Wren returned to family. Dispute ends in nighttime burial. It went on to explain that the deceased, a miner named Elias, had been found crushed in a cave in 2 weeks prior. But the death was controversial. Some claimed he was already dying when he entered the shaft. Others said he'd gone in after something. No one agreed on the details. The strange part was the burial. After 2 days unrested, the body was sealed in the old stone well on the Wren property, after both local clergy and family refused interment on sacred ground. Witnesses say the lid was nailed shut. When asked why, Sheriff Hadley declined comment. Below it, someone had scrawled in pencil, "He was dead but not gone." I flipped to the next page, another clipping, later that same year. Boy missing after visiting Wren well. Locals warn against superstition. The piece described a 12-year-old boy named Henry who had gone missing after tossing a marble into the well as a dare. The search turned up nothing. No body, no evidence, but the family swore they heard dripping sounds in the attic for days after. Eventually they moved. The article ended with a quote from the mayor at the time. There's no curse, just old stones and darker imaginations. The next few pages were more of the same. Disappearances, oddities, reports of water damage in homes untouched by rain, a man whose pipes exploded in winter without freezing, a woman who claimed her husband spoke to someone in the sink before vanishing the next day. Then, this, a torn photograph, black and white, grainy but unmistakable. The well, the same smooth stones, the same crooked lip, a group of men standing beside it in dark coats. One of them held something up, a coin, I think. The caption scribbled in ink at the bottom, "The 13th day." I dropped the folder. My head spun. The sleeper wasn't a ghost. He wasn't even a curse in the usual sense. He was a body in the wrong place, laid in the earth without right or rest and never given back properly, sealed in stone instead of soil. His death hadn't been grieved. It had been hidden, and now every offering, every coin, every whisper was a reminder, a knock on the coffin lid. And if the one who knocked didn't come back to listen, the sleeper did. I stood too fast and knocked the drawer closed. The librarian hadn't moved. She stood near the window now, staring out at the fogged glass like she'd seen this too many times before. "Why hasn't anyone stopped it?" I asked. Her voice was quiet. "He's not the only one down there." "What?" She didn't answer. I left before she could. Outside, the town was quieter than I'd ever heard it. Shops closed, windows dark. A dog barked once from somewhere in the distance, then stopped mid-yelp, as if silenced by a hand that didn't belong. I drove home without thinking. My fingers were numb on the wheel. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on. I hadn't left it that way. I stepped out slowly. The air was worse than before. Wet, yes, but now it had the sour stench of rot thickened by time. Like wood that had gone soft, like bones that had been left in a well too long. I climbed the steps. My boot stuck slightly with each step, the wood soft beneath me. The door was open a crack. Inside, the living room light flickered, just enough to cast shadows that stuttered on the walls like someone walking behind a thin curtain. I pushed the door open. The smell hit first, then the sound. Not water anymore, something else, breathing, wet, gurgling, slow, not like lungs, like something trying to remember how to breathe. And then I saw him, not in the kitchen this time, not standing, crawling. The sleeper's body dragged across the living room floor, arms pulling with unnatural jerks as if the joints inside no longer worked the way they should. His face turned upward, slack and waterlogged. One eye hung low in the socket, shifting independently. He opened his mouth, and from it dropped my watch. It hit the floor with a wet clink and spun. 13 minutes behind. He was closer now, closer than ever. And I realized something then, something worse than the fear. I wasn't being haunted. I was being replaced. I ran. I didn't grab my coat, didn't grab my bag, just turned and sprinted from the doorway, my boots slipping on the water-slick floor. The sleeper's fingers scraped against the wood as he pulled forward, too slow to catch me, but not for long. The sound of his body dragging itself forward followed me like a wet chain across the boards. I didn't look back. I flung open the front door and stumbled down the porch steps. My feet hit the soft grass hard and didn't stop moving until I reached the truck. Keys. God, where were my... In my back pocket. I jammed the key into the lock, hands shaking so badly I missed the slot twice. When it finally turned, I flung the door open, slammed it shut behind me, and locked it on instinct. For a second, I just sat there, breathing, heart clawing at my chest. The porch light flickered once, then went out. The interior of the house behind the window was dark now, silent, but the door was still wide open. I turned the ignition. The engine coughed, stuttered, then roared to life. I didn't wait. I threw it into reverse, backed out fast enough to rip up a patch of the lawn, and spun onto the gravel road. The tires kicked up mud as I peeled down the winding path that led back to the main road, what little there was of it. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing behind me, but that didn't mean I'd escaped. I drove hard, too fast for the sharp curves and narrow shoulders, headlights bouncing off trees that loomed closer than they should. My hands cramped around the wheel. I kept waiting for something to run across the road or step into the beam, some figure, some echo of what I'd seen. But the road stayed empty. The sky above was low, clouds dragging like wet cloth, hanging heavy and gray. No stars, no moon. It wasn't until I hit the turnoff near the old chapel that I saw the first sign something was wrong. The chapel was gone. I mean, physically still there, but sagging, half collapsed, like it had been underwater for years and then set back down to dry. The paint was bubbled and flaking. The roof bowed inward. One stained glass window was missing entirely, the frame black with rot. Water dripped from the eaves in slow, rhythmic pulses. I slowed the truck and stared. The door was open, and inside, just barely visible through the shadows, sat a single wooden bucket, hanging from a length of braided rope. I didn't stop. I didn't blink. I slammed my foot on the gas and kept going. 2 miles ahead, the road narrowed near the ravine bridge. I always hated that stretch. Thin railing, just wide enough for one car, and the drop below was a sharp 40 feet. The creek usually ran low in summer, but tonight, I could hear it before I saw it. Water, not trickling, rushing. I turned the bend, headlights sweeping across the wooden planks of the bridge, and stopped cold. It was underwater. The creek had swollen to 3 times its size, not just risen but surged, covering the bridge entirely. Water lapped over the banks, soaking the edges of the road, swirling with dark silt and uprooted weeds. The sound was deafening, like the roar of a deep pit being filled, and in the center of the flood, where the bridge used to be, floated something round. A bucket. I put the truck in reverse and backed away slowly, heart pounding louder than the engine. Back in town then, back the way I came. But as I turned and started back up the hill, I saw the lights. Not headlights, not houses, lanterns, dozens of them, moving silently between trees. They swayed slightly, not from wind, but from motion, each one casting a thin golden beam, like searchlights held low. And behind them, vague silhouettes, tall, thin, dripping. They didn't walk like people, they glided. I hit the gas again and barreled off the road, cutting across a muddy incline, tires fishtailing as I forced the truck up onto a slope that should have torn the undercarriage clean. I didn't care. I just had to get away. I knew the side route would take me to a fire road, narrow, gravel-covered, rarely used. It wouldn't lead out of town, but it'd get me away from whatever was coming. The trees closed in on either side, branches scraping the roof like fingers as I weaved between overgrowth and potholes. The engine screamed. I didn't slow. Then the dashboard lights blinked. Just once, then again. Then the engine began to stutter. "No," I muttered. No, don't." A burst of steam erupted from the hood. The smell hit instantly. Not coolant. Rot. Like the smell in the house. Like old water and decayed wood and skin left too long in the sun. The engine died. The lights flicked out. The truck rolled once, twice, then stopped. I sat there in silence, gripping the wheel, staring into blackness. Something tapped against the windshield. Not rain. Fingers, long, bloated, leaving behind trails of moisture. One tap. Pause. Another. I didn't turn the headlights on. I didn't move. I just waited. Then they slid back, leaving wet smears and wide, arcing strokes. I opened the door and ran. I didn't care where. Just away. Branches whipped against my face, mud sucked at my feet, my lungs burned with each breath. Somewhere behind me I heard water splashing. Not footsteps. Splashes. Like something too heavy for land was forcing itself forward through shallow flood. I kept running until the trees thinned and I burst into a clearing and froze. I knew this place. I was back behind the house, behind my house. The porch light was on again. The front door was still open. The well was bubbling now, bubbling, froth rising to the surface, overflowing the stone rim in slow, foamy pulses. The rope hung above it, taut, stretched toward the sky like it was waiting for someone to grab hold. And on the porch, standing in the same spot as before, was the sleeper. Only now, he wasn't alone. Another figure stood beside him, smaller, a man, damp clothes clinging to a thin frame, face pale, jaw slack, skin tight around the eyes. He was wearing my coat, my spare coat, the one I hadn't seen in days. He raised a hand in slow, shivering acknowledgement. It was like watching a reflection, but off by degrees, familiar but blurred. The same shape, the same stance. I took one step back, and he took one forward. Then the sleeper turned, and for the first time I saw his face. It was mine, or something like it. Twisted, swollen, water pale, but unmistakable. My mouth opened, but no sound came, because in that moment I understood. He wasn't just coming for me, he was undoing me. I didn't run. I don't know why. Maybe because running hadn't worked before. Maybe because the thing in my coat, the thing with my face, had already taken the step I hadn't. He wasn't coming toward me in anger or hunger. He wasn't chasing. He was waiting. The sleeper turned again, and the motion was wrong. Too slow at first, like someone struggling through thick water, then too fast at the end, like he'd forgotten gravity. His head snapped toward me, chin dipping too low, bones beneath the skin shifting with the sound of wood swelling in rain. I stepped backward into the mud. They watched. No movement, no sound. Behind them, the porch light flickered once, casting two shadows that stretched all the way to the grass where I stood. I turned away. I didn't run. I just walked, not toward the road or the woods, but around the house, toward the back door. The yard behind me was quiet, but the air felt full, like pressure building before a storm. When I stepped back inside, the lights were off. The bulbs must have burned out entirely now. The house was lit only by the fading gray through the windows and the light of the porch behind me. I could still feel them standing there, not watching, remembering. The water was everywhere now. The floors were soaked, the ceilings sagged, and the walls seemed to weep moisture in slow, glistening trails. The smell was unbearable, like fish pulled from a dried-up lake bed and left to rot. It coated my tongue. I couldn't swallow. Something inside me had changed. The mirror above the fireplace had fogged over entirely. Not from condensation. This fog moved, shifted. It didn't reflect the room. It reflected depth, like looking through glass into a submerged hallway where the walls move just a second behind your own. I passed it without looking again. The hallway floor groaned as I stepped down it. The water was ankle deep now, warm as blood, and the same color in the dim. The wood under my feet felt soft, pulpy, and somewhere deep beneath it I thought I felt something pulse. I reached the bedroom. The door was open, and he was inside. Not the sleeper this time, the man in my coat. He stood at the foot of my bed. My spare bag lay open behind him, as if he'd been going through it. His face turned toward me, slow and deliberate. He looked more like me now, less bloated, less pale, like the skin had tightened and dried. He opened his mouth, and for a moment I thought he was going to speak, but all that came out was a long breath, wet, broken, like it had passed through waterlogged lungs. He didn't move. I stepped back and shut the door quietly. When I turned around, the hallway behind me wasn't the hallway anymore. It was deeper, longer, walls slick with moss, wood warped into spirals. The ceiling sloped unnaturally low. The air was thicker here. I walked forward slowly, barefoot now. Had I lost my boots? I didn't remember. Each step made no sound. There were more doors now. On both sides, all closed. I passed one, then another, and on the third I stopped because someone was crying behind it. Soft, wet sobs. A woman. It wasn't loud, just steady, heartbroken. I pressed my hand against the door. The wood pulsed beneath my palm. I turned the knob. The room was empty, just a sink in the corner. Dripping. Each drip landed in a small pool at the center of the floor, and each ripple showed a face. Not mine, not the sleeper. Other faces. Men, women, children, all with their mouths open beneath the surface like they were screaming. I backed out. I turned to run, but the hallway ended. A dead end. The walls closed in tight. I spun back. The door I had just opened was gone. There was only water, knee-deep now, and something brushing past my leg. I screamed and kicked, splashing wildly, trying to climb the wall to claw my way up, but the surface was smooth and soaked in the smell. It was inside me now. In my lungs. And then, silence. No water, no hallway, just me. Standing in the living room, dry, clothes clean, light filtering in through the windows like nothing had happened. The couch was dry, the walls were intact, the floorboards firm beneath my feet. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at my hands. They were wrong. The skin looked fresh, too fresh, like it had been scrubbed raw and recovered. My fingernails were pale, and then I heard the shower running upstairs. I turned toward the staircase. Each step creaked underfoot, but not like before, not waterlogged, just old. I reached the top and walked down the hallway, stopping at the bathroom door. Steam curled from underneath. I pushed it open slowly. The shower curtain was drawn, but behind it, movement, a silhouette, washing itself. I reached forward, hand trembling, and pulled the curtain aside. The man in my coat turned toward me. And this time, he didn't look like me. He was me. But the moment he saw me, his expression cracked. He opened his mouth and tried to speak. No sound came out, only water. It poured from his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He fell to his knees, coughing, hands clutching at his own throat. He looked up at me, eyes wide with horror. Then he dissolved, not like something melting, like something never solid to begin with. And where he'd knelt, the drain was open wide, wider than it should have been. A black circle, too deep, too endless, and from within it came the sound of the rope creaking. The bucket was coming back up. I ran from the bathroom and didn't stop until I slammed the front door behind me. But the yard was wrong now. The trees were gone. The well stood taller, wider, with its stone sides dark as night. Its mouth gaped open like a grave. The rope had reached the top, and inside the bucket, my boots and my watch, still 13 minutes behind. I didn't go near the bucket. I couldn't. It sat at the edge of the well like an offering made in reverse, like something had reached deep down into the earth and returned what no longer belonged to me. The boots were mine, caked with dried silt and black slime that flaked like scabs. The watch lay beside them, ticking softly in a puddle inside the wooden slats. The second hand twitched, paused, reversed, then ticked forward again. 13 minutes behind, time I'd already spent, time I hadn't earned. The rope sagged now, limp against the side of the well, curling down into the darkness like a tether left cut. The water inside was still but too black. It didn't reflect, didn't glint in the sunlight. It swallowed light. Behind me, the house breathed. The sound was faint, walls creaking in slow rhythm, windows fogging from within, the roof ticking as if it were settling over something larger than it was meant to contain. I backed away from the well, every step an effort. My body felt heavier, my joints stiff, not like fatigue, like replacement, like I was becoming something else by standing too long in one place. I stumbled up the porch steps and reached for the knob. It turned in my hand before I touched it. The door opened inward on its own. The living room was full of water. It hadn't poured in. It had risen, waist deep now. The couch was half submerged, cushions bobbing like bloated corpses. Picture frames floated past, their contents distorted. One showed my face, but the eyes were wrong. Too wide, too dark. Fixed directly on me no matter how I turned it. I waited inside. The water was warm, slick. It clung to my skin in slow, dragging resistance, as if something beneath it was holding my limbs in place. Every step took more effort than the last. My heartbeat thudded against the pressure in my chest, dull and underwater. The hallway was longer again. I didn't remember walking toward it, but I was in it now. The doors on either side pulsed slightly, as if something behind them had matched its breath to mine. I passed the bathroom, door open, water spilling from the tub in a thin stream that joined the flood. I passed the closet, open now. Inside hung only a coat, my coat, dry. I passed the mirror at the hallway's end. It was no longer fogged. It was no longer a mirror. It was a window. I saw the well in it, but not as it was now, as it had been. Stone newer, mortar pale and fresh. The lid was nailed down. A line of people stood behind it. Men in long coats, one holding a Bible, another holding a hammer. None of them looked at the camera. None of them smiled. Beneath them, in the earth, something moved. The mirror rippled. I blinked and I was back in the living room. The water was up to my chest now, and the stairs creaked. The first one, then the second, then the third. He was coming down, not fast, not slow, just inevitable. I turned toward the stairs, and the sleeper turned with me, his head tilted, not confused, acknowledging. His eyes were mine now, but old, heavy, set too deep in his face, like they had watched centuries, ceilings from the bottom of a grave. He stepped down onto the floorboards and the water didn't move around him. It moved through him. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. He walked forward, not lunging, not reaching, just approaching, and I realized he didn't need to take my body. He didn't want it. He was giving mine back, piece by piece. Everything I'd forgotten, everything I'd wasted, he had kept. He had stored it. Now he was returning it. I fell backward into the water, gasping, and it filled my nose, my throat. My vision blurred as my head went under. The world turned black, and then I was standing somewhere else, dry, cold. The room was made of stone. The walls were wet with age. Moss glistened in the mortar. A single rope hung down into a black shaft at the center. At my feet, my watch still ticking, I heard my name, not spoken, breathed. From below, a low, wet croak, ancient and full of weight. It curled around my spine like smoke. I looked down. The well below me pulsed once, and something rose. Not fast, not reaching, just rising. It was me, but not me. Bloated, wide-eyed, mouth full of black water. He opened his mouth and said, "I was waiting." I screamed and opened my eyes. Back in the living room, the water was gone. The house was dry again, but everything was wrong. The couch was on the other side of the room. The walls were painted the color I'd hated when I moved in and changed them. The photos on the wall weren't mine, but the man in them was, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize, holding a child I'd never seen, smiling, my body, my face, but a life that wasn't mine. Footsteps came from the hall. I turned. He entered the room, drying his hands on a towel. He looked at me with something like disappointment. 13 days, he said. I backed away, hit the wall, felt the wallpaper peel beneath my fingers. I didn't mean. He stepped closer. "It doesn't matter." My throat tightened. "What do you want?" He didn't answer. He just held out his hand. In his palm, the coin I had dropped. Cold, wet, returned. I stared at it, at him, at the life around us, and I realized I wasn't the one being undone. He was, and he was dragging me with him. The rope coiled around my feet, wet and knotted. From nowhere, from inside, I looked down, and the floor opened beneath me. Dark, stone, cold, the rope pulled, not hard, not fast, just tight enough that I had to follow. I clawed at the floor, but there was nothing to grip, just damp wood soft as pulp, curling under my fingernails. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone, filled with that same warm pressure that had risen in the house. It wasn't choking me, it was filling me. I slipped down. The room tilted. My legs were gone first, then my hips, then the rest. And then there was only stone. Cold, wet, circular. The walls pressed tight around me, rough and weeping moisture. My breath fogged against the airless dark, and the only sound was the creak of the rope and the slop of something beneath me, far below. I was in the well, really in it. No metaphor, no dream, no trapdoor hallucination. Just stone and rope and depth. And the bucket. It waited a few feet below me, floating in the black, half submerged in the surface of water that looked too thick, too still. The bucket didn't rock. It didn't drift. It waited like it had been expecting me. I reached it with my toes, and the rope pulled again. Down, deeper. Stone gave way to something slicker, walls green with moss and long dead roots. Shapes brushed my legs in the water, shifting slowly in the dark. Not fish, not plants, things that had been left behind. The rope lowered me slowly. The air changed, became dense, saturated with weight and silence. My ears popped once, and in the absence of sound, I heard something else. Voices, hundreds of them, layered and low, like whispers from behind closed stone, all saying the same thing, over and over. Return. The rope slackened. I sank deeper. My chest tightened. The water rose to my ribs, then my neck, then my chin. I held my breath. It reached my mouth. I let go. The water passed through me, not over me. No panic, no struggle. It just filled me, like air, like memory. And then I felt him, below, sleeping, not metaphorically, not symbolically, really there. A presence curled in the black, swollen, waiting, like a body that should have rotted centuries ago but had found some other way to exist. Not alive, not undead, just wrong, and dreaming. His thoughts touched mine like the cold touch of teeth. He showed me the others, the ones who came before me, their faces pressed into stone, their bones curled around coins, their watches all ticking 13 minutes too slow. He had taken them, not to consume, but to house, a mausoleum of those who didn't return, and now I was here. My own space carved beneath the rock, a shelf, a hollow, a place for me. I screamed underwater, and the sound didn't go far. It just curled back and sank into my throat again. I tried to climb the rope, but my hands passed through it like silt. My body was heavier now. The water no longer resisted, it accepted. The sleeper was rising, but not alone. He had brought me with him. I don't know how long I sank. There was no time in the well, just wait. And then I stopped. My feet found something soft. I opened my eyes. There was light now, pale and green, flickering like fireflies in mud. I was standing in a chamber of stone, half submerged, the water just above my waist. Around me were walls shaped by hand, ancient, unfinished, and in the center of the room was the sleeper. His back was to me. He knelt, hands resting in his lap, motionless, waiting. He turned, and I understood. He had never wanted to take anything. He had wanted to give it back. Everything he had been forced to keep. Every wish, every coin, every broken promise dropped into the dark without thought. He was full, and I was just the latest echo in his overflowing chest. He raised one hand. Something dropped into the water. It was my coin, the original, clean, untarnished. It floated for a second, then it sank straight down, through me, into me. And I saw the moment again. Me, standing at the well's edge, casual, joking. I wished for clarity, I had said, and dropped the coin, and walked away. Clarity. I had asked for clarity, and I had received it. In the purest form imaginable, the clarity of consequence, of debt, of what waits when you make an offering and don't return. I sank again. This time, I didn't fight it. The sleeper reached for me, and in his face, I saw mine. Older, swollen, eyeless, mouth cracked at the edges, lips peeling like bark, but undeniably me. He opened his arms. I opened mine. We met in the center of the well, and then, nothing. No light, no thought, just stone and coin and rope. When the searchers came months later, after someone filed reports of silence and mold and unpaid rent, they found the house collapsed inward. The walls buckled, the foundation drowned. At the center of the living room floor, the wood had splintered into a perfect circle, a hole they hadn't noticed on earlier inspections, a shaft, stone-lined, ancient, a well that hadn't been on any map. They sent someone down. He didn't return. They pulled him up on the line, unconscious. In his hand they found a coin. Old, rust-streaked, scratched. The face was worn smooth, the date unreadable, but he wouldn't let it go. He clutched it even as they carried him away. His watch, they said, was ticking, 13 minutes slow.